In Revelation chapter 13 of your Bible, in verse 1 and 2, it does state that there is coming a government that is rising out of the sea of humanity. It also distinguishes that there is going to be a personality behind it, behind the scene, called the dragon. We know from Revelation 12:9 that this is the great red dragon called Satan and the devil that's deceived the whole world. In 1776, on May 1st, Adam Weishaupt founded the Illuminati. They were worshipers of Lucifer or Satan. They merged with international Freemasonry at the very highest level in 1782. And ever since then, they've created super rights that have been above those in lower Freemasonry, so that those in lower Freemasonry does not even know that they exist. Therefore, they are unknown, and they give orders to all the Masonic lodges all over the world. They are the ones who started World War I. They're the ones who founded international communism. They're the ones that created revolutionary wars. Albert Pike stated in 1871, August 15th, in a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini, that in order to destroy atheism and Christianity at the same time, they would have a plan for the 20th century on into the 21st, to the time when the age of Aquarius arrived, and they would have their kingdom or world government intact. They said they had to have many revolutionary wars. That's been all through the 20th century into the 21st by international communism. They said that they would create 2 world wars and a third if necessary. I gave, in some of the taping that will be on the cassette offered at the end of this program, how proof that they started World War I through infiltration into high corridors of power. And now what about World War II, though? As a result of the insider Illuminati engineered Versailles Treaty that ended World War I, which in the words of Lord Curzon of England, he said it was not a treaty, but simply a break in hostilities. Once again, war clouds were to come and to form over Europe because the Illuminati said they had to have at least 2 world wars to bring the world to their knees, so that they would accept world government. If the Second World War did not accomplish it, then they would have to go to the Third World War. And that would be after they built up international communism, Russia specifically. And then they would disarm the United States, and there would be a surprise attack to destroy Christianity and atheism at the same time. But what about the Second World War? At the same time, when war clouds were beginning once again to form over Europe, as the international bankers were bolstering the sagging communist regime in Russia, they were also underwriting huge loans on both sides of the Atlantic for the new regime of Adolf Hitler. The financial backing for Hitler was handled by the Warburg-controlled Mendelssohn Bank of Amsterdam, Holland, and later by the J. Schroeder Bank with branches in Frankfurt, Germany, London, England, and New York City. It's interesting to note that the chief legal counsel to the Schroeder Bank was the firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, whose senior partners included John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, both members of the subversive Council on Foreign Relations that now controls and dominates Washington, D.C., and has taken our government from the people and given it to the secret societies. This information was found in the book All Honorable Men by James Martin, page 51. There's considerable evidence available to indicate that Hitler had no intention of attacking Britain and of engaging in a war with a power that he so admired. The Second World War was fought in such a way as to further the aims of the Illuminati toward world government so that their program would come closer to reality. Following the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression pact of 1939, Germany and Russia invaded Poland. They divided the country between them. At that point, Britain and France, at the urging of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States, and the insiders on the Council on Foreign Relations, who were mostly Freemasons in the very high 33rd degree, declared war on Germany, but not on Russia. During the following 8 months, there was a phony war in which very little real action took place. While Chamberlain was Prime Minister of Britain, there was no real shooting war at all with Germany. The leaders of both the German and the British governments were aware of the plans of the international bankers to have another major war, and they were negotiating in an effort to avoid that war. Hitler wanted Britain to join him in an all-out attack on the conspirators and take away their central banks that would control their economies. But the controlled press in Britain launched a bitter campaign against Chamberlain, Prime Minister. The powers that were in charge wanted Chamberlain out of the way so that they could get on with a real war the way they wanted it. Under the propaganda barrage, Chamberlain was forced to resign. He was replaced by Winston Churchill, who also knew of the Illuminati. He also knew of Karl Marx and those that were in these subterranean areas, working underground, infiltrating. He knew of international communism. He knew of V.I. Lenin and what their plans and goals were. But immediately afterward, after Winston Churchill came into the prime ministership, the shooting war started in earnest with a British air attack in Germany. That was all found in the book Bombing Vindicated by J.M. Spate, who happened to be the principal assistant secretary to the British Air Ministry, and it was published in 1944. The following year, the German High Command, unknown to Hitler, sent Rudolf Hess to Britain to contact Lord Hamilton and Churchill to tell them that they would sign a peace treaty. The German generals would get rid of Adolf Hitler, and they would concentrate their military might on the destruction of international communism in Russia and other European countries. Churchill refused to agree with these men to destroy communism. They put Hess in a prison, and he stayed there for the duration of the war and for many, many years afterward. Following their failure, the German generals persuaded Hitler to undertake an all-out attack on Soviet Russia, pointing out that until Russia was defeated, they wouldn't be safe from their backside because of Stalin. Immediately after Germany attacked Russia on June 22nd, 1941, instead of letting Hitler and Stalin destroy each other, the Roosevelt administration began to pour billions of dollars of Lend-Lease aid into Russia to support that brutal communist regime. Propaganda portrayed Stalin as our noble ally, when in reality they were looking for the day when they would destroy the United States of America and create their world government. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, policies put into effect by Roosevelt in 1936 were forcing the Japanese into a position where they would either have to fight or give in. They decided to fight. There's now indisputable evidence that top government officials in Washington, D.C. were fully aware in advance of the attack that was going to take place on Pearl Harbor by that Japanese military. And it was found in a book called The Final Secret of Pearl Harbor by Rear Admiral Robert A. Theobald, United States Navy retired. He published it in 1954. Also, it was found in the book Warlords of Washington by Anthony Hilder, with an interview with Colonel Curtis B. Dahl, who happened to be the son-in-law of the late President Roosevelt, who was involved. The truth is that the real powers in Washington wanted the war because the Illuminati said they had to have at least 2 world wars and a third if necessary. With Japan, they wanted it. They wanted it with Germany. And they were doing everything in their power to induce the Japanese to launch an attack on the United States of America, so that we would go into that war and have an excuse before the American public. One of the leading court historians explained Roosevelt's deceitfully lying actions as follows, I quote, "Franklin Roosevelt repeatedly deceived the American people during the period before Pearl Harbor. The country was overwhelmingly non-interventionist to the day of Pearl Harbor, and an overt attempt to lead the people into war would have resulted in certain failure and an almost certain ousting of Roosevelt in 1940, with a consequent defeat of his ultimate aims." End of quote. From the book The Man in the Street by Thomas A. Bailey, page 11 and 12. The American people had to be made to want war. There had to be something planned that would be so horrible that it would affect the people of the United States. The parents who had military personnel stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So on December 7th, 1941, that became the day of infamy. That infamy, however, was centered in Washington, D.C. There are skeletons in Uncle Sam's closet, better known as the federal government, concerning the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor attack was instigated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill of Britain. The attack was forced into existence by the United States, Great Britain, and the Dutch. This was accomplished by an embargo which cut off all shipping into and out of Japan, thus threatening the Japanese people with starvation. 9 months before the Pearl Harbor attack, Clifford M. Andrew was sent to Pearl Harbor and put in charge of a critical portion of both Army and Navy intelligence communications. He was placed in this position to prevent the commanding officers at Hawaii, Admiral Kimmel and General Short, from receiving any warning of the impending attack by the Japanese. The attack had to be successful to draw America into the war. The Illuminati said they had to have 2 world wars. World War I was finished. The treaty was written in such a way that it was just a cessation of the battle. And now the battle had to resume with the United States and Britain involved. And it had to be a world conflict so that there would be such horror hoisted upon the world's population that they would cry out for some international organization to prevent war in the future and to bring peace to the world. Approximately 1 week prior to the Pearl Harbor attack, General George C. Marshall and Admiral Stark began to discontinue informing President Roosevelt of incoming Japanese intelligence information. Also 1 week before the attack, Rear Admiral Paulus Prince Powell, Roosevelt's senior White House naval aide prior to 1934, was ordered to the Naval Intelligence Department in Washington, D.C. to be briefed as first naval attaché to Portugal, which is a neutral nation. On Thursday, December 4th, 1941, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Hawaiian time, a message was received in the Hawaiian Army Intelligence Department from Melbourne, Australia, that the United States agreement with Great Britain and the Dutch, it was called the ABCD agreement, had been activated, and that they were automatically at war with Japan. This was before the bombing ever took place. This was 3 days before the attack. Furthermore, the Hawaiian Military Intelligence Department had received messages from United States picket ships and submarines to the effect that a Japanese fleet with aircraft carriers fully loaded was approaching Hawaii. and would be within striking distance by Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. Gerald Mason Van Dyke was an Army intelligence officer. He was more than that, but he was in Hawaii at the time of the attack. He knew of the coming attack. His first report on the subject was made November 29th, 1941, 8 days before the attack. He sent his warning message to Washington, D.C. on a Thursday afternoon, December 4th, 1941, at 2 p.m. Hawaiian time. His message was received and intercepted by Rear Admiral Paulus Prince Powell in Washington, D.C. at about 7 p.m. Washington time. Powell notified Secretary of War Henry Frank Knox, who in turn immediately contacted Secretary of War Henry Stimson. Stimson called Roosevelt, and Roosevelt came to the Naval Intelligence Department. Secretary of the Navy, Knox, said that they should get the Navy out and set up a defense perimeter for the islands. However, Undersecretary of Navy James Vincent Forrestal became very concerned also. Roosevelt blocked their attempt to warn Pearl Harbor by putting Knox, Powell, and Forrestal under armed guard until after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt sent the following message to Clifford M. Andrew, quote, "The Japanese will attack. Do not prepare defenses. We need the full support of the American nation in a wartime effort by an unprovoked attack upon the nation." End of quote. The message sent to Admiral Kimmel and General Short by Roosevelt said something totally different. It said, and I quote, "Expect Japanese sabotage." End of quote. Preparation for sabotage is exactly the opposite of the preparation for an aerial attack to destroy the military base and all of the ships. On Friday evening, December 5th, 1941, at about 5 p.m., Gerald Mason Van Dyke warned his son, Lyle Hartford Van Dyke of Portland, Oregon, that the Japanese would attack soon, most probably Sunday, December the 7th. He told his son that the intelligence department in Washington, D.C. had been warned. His son put up a stockpile of goods in preparation for an attack on the mainland of the United States by the Japanese. So as you can see, there was an absolute day of infamy with the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was planned by those in the Illuminati. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a 32nd degree Freemason. He took his orders from the 33rd degree from the Illuminati. He was controlled by those men. A strange man by the name of Howe lived 5 years in his home before he was elected president, laying down the program to socialize America on what was called the New Deal. After the war was supposedly fought to save democracy, the opposite was the truth. There's considerable evidence that indicates that the war, particularly in Europe, could have been won much more quickly than it was. Had the war been run on conventional lines, Germany could have been attacked through the soft underbelly of Europe after Italy surrendered on September 8th, 1943. Instead of going straight for Germany's heart, the Allied High Command, under the direction of General Eisenhower, High Mason, a protege of George C. Marshall, who had been responsible along with others for withholding the news of the planned Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Eisenhower withdrew much of the heavy equipment from the war front and began to turn the British Isles into a huge armed fortress. What was the motivation for the refusal of civilian leaders to reject such a logical plan as to go up under the underbelly and to bomb German industry? Because the Illuminati had laid out the plans. They said, first we will take Eastern Europe. So the communists had to be able to march all the way into Germany. They had to delay the effort to win the war until Russia could come in and occupy Eastern Europe. That was V.I. Lenin's plan laid down in 1921. So Bible prophecy is happening, but we need to know what's behind the scenes to make it become fulfilled. And so it is that you and I need to make sure that our lives are right with our God, the living Jesus Christ, because of the things that are coming.